I never expected to find myself standing in the rain outside my father's lawyer's office, forbidden from entering a meeting about my own inheritance. But there I was, water soaking through my black dress, mascara running down my cheeks, as my husband Michael and my older brother James made decisions about my future without me. The worst part? I had no idea that what awaited inside that room would change everything I thought I knew about my family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Winters. 3 weeks ago, my father, the strongest, most principled man I've ever known, died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 68. Dad had built Winters Publishing from a tiny local press to one of the most respected independent publishing houses in the Northeast. Books were his passion, his legacy, and the center of our family's life for as long as I could remember. I was in Chicago when it happened, attending a literary conference to scout new authors for our fall catalog. The call came at 2:47 a.m., my brother James's voice cracking as he told me Dad had collapsed at home. By the time I rushed to the airport and caught the first flight back to Boston, it was too late. He was gone. Grief hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and leaving me disoriented in a world that suddenly made no sense. My father and I had always been kindred spirits. After my mother died from cancer when I was 14, Dad and I formed a special bond over our shared love of literature. He taught me everything he knew about publishing, storytelling, and recognizing genuine talent. When I graduated with my English degree, joining Winters Publishing wasn't just expected, it was what I desperately wanted. The funeral passed in a blur of tear-streaked faces and hushed condolences. I remember standing between Michael and James as the casket was lowered into the ground, my body numb even as my mind screamed in protest. Michael kept his arm firmly around my waist, his presence both comforting and strangely controlling. James remained stoic, barely speaking except to accept sympathies from Dad's many industry colleagues and friends. Michael and I had been married for 5 years. He worked in finance, a world far removed from publishing, but had always shown interest in the business side of Winters Publishing. Too much interest, according to my father, who once confided that he found Michael too eager about the bottom line. I'd dismissed Dad's concerns as old-fashioned skepticism toward my husband's more modern business approach. James had worked alongside Dad since dropping out of college 15 years ago. As production manager, he oversaw the physical creation of our books, but showed little interest in acquisitions or editorial decisions, the heart of publishing that Dad and I so loved. His relationship with our father had always been complicated, marked by James's resentment over perceived favoritism toward me and Dad's frustration with James's lack of literary passion. The day after the funeral, I sat in Dad's home office, trying to process the reality that he was gone. His reading glasses still lay on the mahogany desk beside a manuscript he'd been reviewing. Post-it notes lined the pages, filled with his distinctive handwriting. I picked up the half-finished cup of tea, now covered with a film of dust, and felt fresh tears blur my vision. A knock at the door interrupted my solitary morning. Michael stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Emma, James just called. We're meeting with your father's attorney tomorrow morning at 10. Mr. Harrison wants to review the will." I nodded, setting the teacup down carefully. I should prepare some questions about the company transition. Dad and I had discussed several upcoming projects that— "Don't worry about all that right now," Michael interrupted, his tone gentler than his words. "You're still grieving. James and I can handle the business details." Something in his voice made me pause. "But I'm the editorial director. The upcoming catalog is my responsibility." Michael crossed the room and placed his hands on my shoulders. "Emma, you're exhausted. You've barely slept since your father died. Let us take care of this initial meeting, and we'll fill you in afterward." I wanted to protest, but exhaustion clouded my judgment. Perhaps he was right. I was in no state to discuss business matters. "Fine," I conceded, "but call me immediately afterward." That night, I overheard Michael on the phone in our guest bedroom, his voice hushed but intense. "She doesn't suspect anything. No, she agreed to let us handle it. Harrison won't have a choice once we explain the situation. Of course I'm sure, James. Just follow my lead tomorrow." I froze in the hallway, my hand gripping the wall for support. What were they planning? What didn't I suspect? Sleep evaded me that night as I replayed the conversation in my mind, searching for innocent explanations, but finding none. Morning came with a relentless headache and a sense of dread I couldn't shake. Over breakfast, Michael seemed unusually attentive, refilling my coffee and insisting I eat something. "You need your strength," he said, watching me with careful eyes. "Take today for yourself. Maybe visit that bookshop you love in Cambridge? I'll call as soon as we're finished with Harrison." His suggestion that I venture nearly an hour away from the lawyer's office felt calculated rather than caring. As he and James prepared to leave, something inside me snapped, a sudden clarity cutting through my fog of grief. "Actually," I said, setting down my mug with deliberate calm, "I think I should be there. Dad would want me involved from the beginning." Michael's smile faltered momentarily before returning with less warmth. "We already discussed this, Emma. You're in no state to handle legal matters right now." "I'm perfectly capable of attending a will reading for my own father," I insisted, standing my ground. James, who had remained silent during our exchange, finally spoke. "Michael's right, Em. There's no need for you to sit through boring legal procedures when you're still processing everything. We'll handle it." Their united front against my presence struck me as both odd and alarming. I'd experienced enough editorial meetings to recognize when someone was desperately trying to control the narrative. "I appreciate your concern," said carefully. "But I've made up my mind. I'll meet you there." The tension in the room thickened. Michael and James exchanged a look I couldn't decipher before Michael sighed dramatically. "If you insist, but we've already told Harrison to expect just the two of us. The meeting's actually at 9, not 10, and we're heading there now." The deliberate deception knocked the wind from me. My own husband had lied about the time of my father's will reading, a critical family matter that directly involved me. Before I could respond, they were already heading for the door. "We'll see you there if you can make it," James called over his shoulder, not bothering to look back. I stood frozen in our kitchen, my mind racing to make sense of their behavior. What could possibly be in Dad's will that they were so determined to keep from me? Why would Michael, my partner and supposed supporter, conspire with James to exclude me? The questions propelled me into action. I grabbed my car keys and raced after them, not bothering to change out of my rumpled clothes or fix my hair. By the time I arrived at Harrison & Associates, rain had begun to fall, a fine, misty drizzle that seemed too gentle for the storm brewing inside me. I spotted Michael's sleek black Audi in the parking lot and pulled in beside it, my hands shaking as I turned off the ignition. The receptionist looked up in surprise when I entered the lobby, raindrops clinging to my hair and shoulders. "Mrs. Winters, we weren't expecting you." "I'm here for my father's will reading," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "My husband and brother should already be with Mr. Harrison." Her expression shifted to discomfort. "Yes, they arrived about 20 minutes ago. Let me see if they're ready for you to join them." She picked up the phone, speaking in hushed tones I couldn't quite catch. After a brief conversation, she replaced the receiver and offered an apologetic smile. "Mr. Harrison asks if you could wait a few minutes. They're discussing some preliminary matters." "Preliminary matters about my father's will that don't involve me?" I didn't bother hiding my disbelief. "I'm just relaying the message, Mrs. Winters. I'm sure it won't be long." I took a seat in the waiting area, anger and hurt competing for dominance inside me. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The receptionist avoided my gaze, busying herself with paperwork. After 30 minutes of excruciating silence, I approached her desk again. "Please tell Mr. Harrison that I'm still waiting to discuss my father's estate." She made another call, her discomfort visibly increasing. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Winters. They've asked not to be disturbed. Mr. Harrison suggests you might be more comfortable waiting at home. Your husband promised to brief you afterward." The dismissal was so blatant, so inappropriate, that for a moment, I couldn't respond. Then a new feeling emerged through my hurt and confusion: determination. Dad had always told me that in publishing, like in life, you sometimes had to fight for your place at the table. "Nobody hands you a seat," he'd say. "Sometimes you have to pull up your own chair." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Please inform Mr. Harrison that as Charles Winters' daughter and the editorial director of Winters Publishing, I insist on being present for discussions about my father's estate. If I'm not admitted in the next 5 minutes, I'll be contacting the Bar Association to file a complaint." I had no idea if such a complaint would be valid, but the threat had its intended effect. Less than 3 minutes later, the conference room door opened, and Michael emerged, his expression a careful mask of concern. "Emma, there you are. We were just about to call you." The lie came smoothly, his financial advisor charm on full display. "We're simply reviewing some basic information. Nothing important has been discussed yet." "Then you won't mind if I join you now," I replied, already moving past him toward the door. Michael caught my arm, his grip firmer than necessary. "Actually, Harrison suggested we speak to you privately first. There are some sensitive matters in your father's will that might be upsetting in your current state." I pulled my arm, free, suddenly aware of the receptionist watching our exchange with undisguised interest. The only thing upsetting me right now is being excluded from my own father's will reading. Before Michael could respond, a familiar voice called from inside the conference room. "Let her in, Michael. We can't keep her out forever." James sounded resigned, perhaps even relieved. Michael's jaw tightened momentarily before he stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter with a politeness that didn't match the calculation in his eyes. The conference room felt unnaturally bright after the dimness of the rainy morning. Mr. Harrison, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who had been my father's attorney for over 30 years, stood as I entered. His expression was difficult to read, professional neutrality tinged with what might have been sympathy. "Emma, I apologize for the confusion. Your husband and brother thought it best to prepare you gradually for some of the provisions in your father's will." I took the empty seat across from James, noting the papers spread across the polished table. I appreciate their concern, but I prefer to hear my father's wishes directly and in their entirety. Harrison nodded, retaking his seat as Michael closed the door and moved to stand behind my chair, a position that felt more supervisory than supportive. As I was explaining to Michael and James, Harrison continued, adjusting his glasses, "Your father made some significant changes to his will approximately 3 months ago. These amendments primarily concern the ownership and management of Winters Publishing." My heart began to pound. 3 months ago would have been right after Dad and I had that long weekend retreat in Vermont, discussing the future of the company and my growing role within it. He had seemed particularly reflective during that trip, talking about legacy and values in a way that felt more urgent than usual. "What kind of changes?" I asked, aware of Michael shifting behind me. Harrison opened a folder and removed a document bearing my father's signature. Previously, Charles had arranged for Winters Publishing to be divided equally between you and James upon his death, with a small portion allocated to a trust for staff benefits. However, the amended will significantly alters this distribution. James leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. Michael's hand came to rest on my shoulder, his fingers digging in slightly as Harrison continued. Charles has left controlling interest, 65% of Winters Publishing, to you, Emma. James retains 20%, and the Staff Benefit Trust receives 15%. Harrison paused, allowing the information to sink in. Furthermore, Charles has explicitly named you as the new Chief Executive Officer and has left detailed instructions regarding the company's future direction. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I had expected to share leadership with James, perhaps taking the editorial helm while he managed production and operations. Dad had never indicated such a dramatic imbalance in our inheritance. "That's ridiculous," James said, his voice tight with anger. "Dad would never cut me out like that. He built that company for both of us." "There must be some mistake," Michael added, his hand now heavy on my shoulder. "Charles always spoke of equal shares between the siblings. This new arrangement seems influenced." The implication was clear. They believed I had somehow manipulated my father during our Vermont trip. The accusation stung all the more because of how special that weekend had been, filled with heartfelt conversations about books, art, and the kind of legacy that mattered most. "There's no mistake," Harrison replied firmly. "Charles was explicit about his wishes and his reasoning. The will includes a letter explaining his decisions, which I was instructed to read aloud to all of you." He withdrew another document from his folder, this one handwritten on the personal stationery Dad had always used for important correspondence. My throat tightened at the sight of his familiar handwriting. "My dear Emma and James," Harrison began, his voice taking on a gentler tone. "If you're hearing these words, then I've left this world sooner than any of us would have wished. I hope you'll forgive an old man for making decisions that may initially seem unfair or unexpected. Throughout my life, I've learned that a publishing house is more than a business. It's a custodian of ideas, a champion of voices, and a bridge between worlds. Winters Publishing has always stood for integrity, literary excellence, and the belief that the right book can change a life. My decision to leave controlling interest to Emma is not a reflection of my love, which has always been equal for both my children. Rather, it is a recognition of purpose and vision. Emma understands, intuitively, what has always been at the heart of Winters Publishing, the books themselves and the readers whose lives they touch. James, you have been loyal and hardworking, and your production expertise has been invaluable. But a company must be led by someone who embodies its core values and mission. Your sister has demonstrated time and again her commitment to the principles upon which I built this company. As for any outside interests who may see Winters Publishing primarily as a financial asset," Harrison paused here, his eyes briefly meeting Michael's before returning to the letter. "I must be clear that this company is not for sale, in whole or in part, for a minimum period of 10 years following my death. This provision is non-negotiable and legally binding. Emma, I entrust you with more than a business. I entrust you with a legacy of ideas and ideals. Lead with the same passion for literature that has always connected us. Trust your instincts about both books and people. They rarely lead you astray. James, I ask you to support your sister and to continue contributing your valuable skills to the company. Your role remains essential, even if different from what you may have expected. Know that I leave you both with immeasurable love and the confidence that, together or separately, you will find your way forward. With deepest affection, your father." Harrison folded the letter carefully and returned it to the folder. The silence that followed was dense with unspoken emotions. I sat perfectly still, tears blurring my vision. Dad's words were unmistakably his, thoughtful, principled, and concerned with the deeper purpose of the work we did. The 10-year sale prohibition explained so much about Michael and James's behavior. If they had hoped to sell the company, that option was now firmly off. The table. "This is bullshit," James finally exploded, standing so abruptly that his chair tipped over backward. Dad was old and sentimental. He wasn't thinking clearly. On the contrary, Harrison interjected, Charles was perfectly lucid when he made these amendments. I spent several hours discussing his reasoning with him, and his decisions were both rational and legally sound. We should contest it, Michael said, his hand finally leaving my shoulder as he moved to stand beside James. Charles was clearly influenced during that trip to Vermont. Emma probably fed him some story about James not caring about the literary side of the business. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and unfounded. I thought about those days in Vermont, walking through autumn woods with Dad, discussing favorite novels by the fireplace, talking about the future of publishing in a digital world. There had been no manipulation, only genuine connection. I never discussed inheritance with Dad, I said quietly. We talked about books, about publishing philosophy, about upcoming projects. Not once did we talk about who would own what. Convenient, James muttered. Just happened to have him all to yourself right before he changed everything in your favor. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw something beyond the anger. Fear, perhaps, or loss. This isn't about favoritism, James. It's about Dad's vision for the company. A vision that conveniently excludes me from leadership, he shot back. It doesn't exclude you, I argued. It defines your role differently than you expected. You're still a significant owner and a crucial part of operations. Michael paced behind James, his financial advisor's mind visibly calculating new angles. The 10-year sale prohibition, is that even legally enforceable? Harrison nodded. Absolutely. Charles structured it as a trust condition. Any attempt to circumvent it would result in automatic forfeiture of ownership shares to the Staff Benefit Trust. Michael's expression darkened. I suddenly remembered conversations over the past year, casual questions about the company's valuation, suggestions about modernizing our business model, comments about larger publishing groups looking for acquisition, targets. Had he been planning a sale all along? Michael, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. Did you know about Dad's changes to the will before today? My husband's hesitation told me everything. James looked away, unable to meet my eyes. You did, didn't you? That's why you tried to keep me away from this meeting. You already knew and were trying to find a way around it. Emma, be reasonable, Michael said, his tone shifting to one I recognized from disagreements at home. Calm, patronizing, designed to make me doubt myself. Your father's decision doesn't make business sense. Winters Publishing would be much more valuable as part of a larger group. We could all benefit substantially from a sale. Benefit financially, you mean? At the cost of everything my father built and believed in. I turned to Harrison. How did they know about the will changes before today? The attorney looked uncomfortable. They contacted me shortly after your father's death, expressing concerns about your emotional state and requesting preliminary information. I informed them only of the general outline, not the specific details or the letter. I apologize if that was inappropriate, but they were quite persuasive about acting in your best interests. My best interests, I repeated, the words tasting bitter. By conspiring to keep me away from my own father's will reading? By planning to challenge his explicit wishes? I stood, gathering my composure despite the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Mr. Harrison, please provide me with complete copies of all documents relating to my father's estate and Winters Publishing. As the majority owner and newly appointed CEO, I'll need them immediately. Of course, he nodded, already gathering papers. Emma, don't be hasty, Michael cautioned, his tone now placating. We should discuss this as a family. We are discussing it, I replied, and what I'm learning about my family is quite illuminating. James remained silent, his earlier anger seemingly deflated. He stared at the table, avoiding everyone's eyes. The company isn't for sale, I continued. Not now, not in 5 years, not in 9 years and 11 months. Dad entrusted me with his legacy, and I intend to honor that trust. If either of you can't accept that, you're free to sell your shares, to me, at market value. Michael's expression hardened. You can't afford to buy us out. Actually, Harrison interjected, there's one more provision I haven't mentioned. Charles established a special fund to allow Emma to purchase additional shares if necessary. He called it the safeguard provision. The revelation struck like a physical blow. Dad hadn't just protected the company from outside sale. He'd anticipated potential conflict within the family and prepared for it. How long had he observed the dynamics between us? How much had he seen that I had missed, blinded by familial loyalty and marriage vows? Dad knew, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. He knew you would try to sell. He was paranoid, James muttered, but without conviction. He was perceptive, I corrected, and I'm only now beginning to understand how right he was. I gathered the documents Harrison had prepared for me, suddenly eager to leave the stifling conference room with its atmosphere of thwarted schemes and exposed motivations. I'll be at Dad's house if either of you wish to discuss how we move forward from here, I said, pausing at the door. As a family, and as stakeholders in Winters Publishing. But understand this, the company will continue to operate according to his principles and vision. That's non-negotiable. As I walked through the reception area, past the curious eyes of the staff who had undoubtedly overheard raised voices, I felt a strange mixture of grief and strength. My father was gone, but he had left me more than a company. He had left me clarity. Outside, the rain had stopped, though dark clouds still hung overhead. I stood for a moment, documents clutched to my chest, and took a deep breath of the damp, cool air. For the first time since receiving that devastating call in my Chicago hotel room, I felt a sense of purpose cutting through the fog of loss. Dad had trusted me to carry his vision forward. Now I needed to prove him right. I drove directly to my father's house. My house now, I supposed, though I hadn't yet processed that reality. The colonial-style home on Maple Street had been in our family for 3 generations. Its rooms filled with books, memories, and the quiet dignity that had defined my father. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed James's truck parked across the street. He must have left Harrison's office immediately after me, perhaps hoping to continue our confrontation without witnesses. I considered driving away, finding somewhere else to collect my thoughts. But that would only delay the inevitable. This was my home now, my company, my responsibility. I wouldn't start by running away. I found him sitting on the front porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. That was fast, I said, climbing the steps past him to unlock the door. Took the back roads, he replied, remaining seated. Michael's still with Harrison, probably trying to find loopholes. I pushed the door open but didn't enter. Instead, I turned to face my brother. Are you coming in? He hesitated, then stood slowly. You sure you want me in your house? The bitterness in his voice made me flinch. It's still Dad's house. To me? I said quietly. And you're still his son. Inside, the house felt both familiar and strange, as though my father's absence had altered its dimensions somehow. I set the documents from Harrison on the entry table and headed for the kitchen, James following silently. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, the routine actions giving my hands something to do while my mind raced. James leaned against the doorframe, watching me with the wary expression of someone expecting an attack. I didn't know, I said finally, facing him, about the will changes. I had no idea Dad planned to make me CEO. Right, James scoffed, but there was less venom in it than before. It's true, I insisted. When we were in Vermont, we talked about books, about his vision for the company's future. He mentioned wanting me to take on more editorial responsibility, but nothing about ownership or leadership. Then why did he do it? James asked, a genuine question beneath the challenge in his voice. I shook my head. I don't know exactly, but I know he loved you. This wasn't about cutting you out. Just about keeping me in my place, he muttered. The kettle whistled, and I turned to prepare tea in the ceramic pot Dad always used. The familiar ritual felt like a connection to him, a thread I could hold on to amid all this chaos. Is that really how you see it? I asked, measuring loose leaves into the infuser. As a demotion rather than a preservation of what he built? James moved further into the kitchen, taking a seat at the table where our family had shared countless meals. What I see, he said slowly, is that I've worked in that company every day since I was 19 years old. Production, distribution, vendor relationships. I've handled it all while you were getting your fancy degree and traveling to literary conferences. I've been the editorial director for 5 years, I reminded him, placing mugs on the table. And I've been there for 15, he countered. But apparently that counts for nothing because I don't get poetic about books the way you and Dad did. There it was, the core of the resentment, laid bare. I poured the tea, giving myself a moment to formulate a response. Your contribution counts for everything, James. The company wouldn't function without your expertise. Dad knew that. Why else would he leave you 20% ownership? That's a significant stake. But not controlling interest, he said, wrapping his hands around the mug without drinking. Not leadership. I studied my brother's face, so like our father's in its angles and expressions, yet missing the softness around the eyes that had always made Dad approachable even in his sternest moments. Can I ask you something? I said carefully. And I need you to be honest. James shrugged, the gesture non-committal but not outright refusal. Were you and Michael planning to sell the company? His gaze dropped to his tea, and for a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost resigned. Not exactly, not at first. He exhaled heavily. Michael approached me about 3 months ago, right after your Vermont trip with Dad. Said he had connections with Meridian Publishing Group. They were interested in acquiring smaller, respected houses to expand their portfolio. My stomach tightened. Meridian was known in the industry for buying independent publishers, stripping their assets, and absorbing their successful authors while discarding the rest. Michael claimed it would be a partnership, James continued. Said Winters would retain its identity, but gain Meridian's resources and distribution channels. The numbers he mentioned were significant. And you believed him? James rubbed his face tiredly. I believed we needed to consider options. Print publishing isn't what it was in Dad's heyday. The industry's changing. So you decided to sell Dad's life's work without consulting me? I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. We were just exploring possibilities, he defended. Nothing was decided. Then Dad changed his will, and suddenly there were all these obstacles. The 10-year sale prohibition, your controlling interest. Michael got more aggressive after that, talking about contesting the will, finding leverage. And you went along with it, I said, not a question but a statement. James finally met my eyes. I went along with finding out what our options were. I didn't agree to anything underhanded. Except keeping me away from my own father's will reading, I pointed out. He had the grace to look ashamed. That was Michael's idea. He said you were too emotional right now, that we needed time to figure things out before involving you. I knew it wasn't right, but... He trailed off. But what? But I was angry, he admitted. Angry that Dad trusted you more than me, even though I'd been there every day, keeping the operations running while he indulged your literary idealism. The words stung, but there was a kernel of truth in them I couldn't deny. Dad and I had shared a romantic view of publishing that James had never quite embraced. It wasn't about trust, I said softly. It was about vision. Dad knew you could manage production better than anyone, but he also knew you didn't share his passion for what Winters Publishing represents. And what's that exactly? James challenged. Because from where I sit, it's a medium-sized publishing house in an industry that's being squeezed from all sides, by bigger companies, by digital self-publishing, by changing reading habits. Dad's vision might not be sustainable in today's market. I poured more tea, gathering my thoughts. Winters isn't just about publishing books. It's about publishing the right books, giving voices to authors who might otherwise go unheard. It's about quality over quantity, substance over market trends. That was always Dad's philosophy. And a philosophy doesn't pay the bills, James Tidai countered, or keep our staff employed when print runs get smaller and smaller. So your solution is to sell to a conglomerate that will dismantle everything Dad built? I felt my temper rising despite my efforts to remain calm. My solution was to at least consider options before dismissing them, James said, his voice equally heated. But apparently Dad didn't think I deserved a say in the company's future. We stared at each other across the table, the gulf between our perspectives seemingly unbridgeable. Yet beneath the anger and hurt, I could see the same grief that had been consuming me. The loss of not just our father, but the certainty and stability his presence had provided. I don't want to fight with you, James, I said finally. We're both mourning Dad, and this situation isn't making it any easier. But I need to know where you stand now. Are you with me in honoring Dad's wishes for the company? Or are you still aligned with Michael's plans to sell? James was quiet for a long moment, turning his mug in slow circles on the table. Michael texted while I was waiting for you, he said eventually. He wants to meet at your house tonight to discuss strategy for contesting the will. My heart sank. And I didn't answer him, James replied, because I realized something while sitting on that porch. Dad might not have trusted me with the whole company, but he did trust me with part of it. He could have cut me out entirely if he'd wanted to. 20% ownership means he still saw me as part of Winter's future. He looked up, his expression more vulnerable than I'd seen in years. I'm not saying I agree with his decision or that I'm not hurt by it, but I'm not sure I want to spend the next however many months or years in legal battles either. Especially when the outcome might be selling to people who don't care about the company the way we do, even if we care about it differently. Relief washed over me, so intense it left me lightheaded. Does that mean you're willing to work with me instead? Of against me? It means I'm willing to hear what you have in mind for Winters, he said cautiously, before making any decisions. It wasn't a full commitment, but it was a start. A bridge across the chasm that had seemed impassable just hours ago. Fair. Enough, I nodded. I have some ideas about expanding our digital offerings without compromising our print quality. And there's a small literary podcast network I've been watching that might make an interesting acquisition. James raised an eyebrow. You're thinking about acquisitions? I thought the plan was preservation, not expansion. Preservation doesn't mean stagnation, I replied. Dad always said a publishing house is like a living organism. It needs to grow and evolve while staying true to its essential nature. A hint of a smile touched James's lips. You even sound like him sometimes. Is that a bad thing? No, he admitted. Just takes some getting used to. The sound of a car door slamming outside interrupted our fragile moment of connection. Through the kitchen window, I could see Michael striding up the front walk, his posture rigid with purpose. That's Michael, I said unnecessarily, tension returning to my shoulders. James glanced toward the door, then back at me. What are you going to do? It was a loaded question that extended far beyond this immediate confrontation. What was I going to do about Michael's betrayal? About our marriage? About the future of Winters Publishing? The weight of so many decisions pressed down on me, momentarily overwhelming. Then I remembered Dad's words in his letter. Trust your instincts about both books and people. They rarely lead you astray. I'm going to tell the truth, I said, rising from the table as the doorbell rang, and then I'm going to listen to what he has to say after that. We'll see. James stood as well, his expression resolute. I'll stay if you want. You shouldn't have to face him alone. The offer surprised me, touching something deep and almost forgotten. The protective instinct of an older brother that had been buried under years of competition and resentment. Thank you, I said, meaning it. I think I'd like that. As we moved toward the front door together, I felt a shift in our relationship, subtle but significant. We were still grieving, still uncertain, still working through complicated feelings about our father's decisions. But for the first time since his death, we were facing a challenge as siblings rather than adversaries. Whatever came next, with Michael, with the company, with our tenuous reconciliation, we would face it together. And somehow, I thought Dad would have been pleased by that outcome, even if it wasn't exactly what he had planned. The doorbell's sharp ring cut through the tension in the kitchen. James and I exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between us that felt both foreign and familiar. He nodded slightly, and I straightened my shoulders before walking to the front door, my brother following a few steps behind. Michael stood on the porch, his tailored suit slightly rumpled, his expression hardening when he saw James behind me. I see you two have been talking, he said, his voice carrying that artificial pleasantness I'd come to recognize as a warning sign. Come in, I said, stepping aside without offering further explanation. We're in the kitchen. Michael entered, his gaze sweeping over the foyer with new interest, as though mentally cataloging its value. The realization made something cold settle in my stomach. How had I missed this side of him for so long? Back in the kitchen, Michael declined my automatic offer of tea, choosing instead to remain standing while James and I returned to our seats at the table. The dynamic felt strange. My husband suddenly an outsider in this family moment, his presence creating a tension that hummed in the air. So, Michael began, his tone deceptively casual. Have you two been discussing the will? Planning your next steps? We've been talking, I confirmed, watching him carefully. James told me about your conversations with Meridian Publishing. Michael's expression flickered briefly before settling into a practiced smile. I was planning to tell you about those preliminary discussions once things settled. It seemed unnecessary to burden you with business matters while you were grieving. Preliminary discussions about selling my father's company without consulting me? I kept my voice level despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. That seems like something I should have been burdened with, considering I've worked there for almost a decade. Emma, Michael sighed with exaggerated patience, you're thinking emotionally right now. From a business perspective, partnering with Meridian makes sense. Winters Publishing is a respected name, but it's vulnerable in the current market. Meridian can provide stability, resources, expanded distribution. Meridian doesn't partner with independent publishers, I interrupted. They consume them. They've done it to at least 5 houses in the Northeast alone. They keep the valuable authors, discard the mid-list, slash the staff, and eliminate anything that doesn't fit their commercial model. Michael's smile tightened. That's an oversimplification. Their acquisition strategy is actually quite sophisticated. I know exactly what their strategy is, I cut in again. I've watched friends lose their editorial positions after Meridian takeovers. I've seen distinctive publishing houses with decades of literary history reduced to imprint labels slapped on mass-market books. The publishing industry is changing, Michael insisted. Sentimentality is a luxury we can't afford if we want Winters to survive. Survive as what, exactly? I challenged. As a hollow brand name owned by a conglomerate? That's not survival, it's surrender. Michael's facade of patience was cracking. This isn't about sentiment versus business, Emma. It's about realistic versus delusional. Your father's romantic notions about independent publishing might have worked 20 years ago, but the landscape has changed. Those romantic notions built a company that's been profitable for 40 years, I reminded him. A company that's launched award-winning authors and created a respected catalog that continues to generate revenue. Diminishing revenue, Michael countered. I've seen the numbers, Emma. The trends aren't favorable. I felt a flare of irritation. I've seen the same numbers. Last quarter was challenging, but the two before that exceeded projections. One difficult season doesn't justify selling the entire company. It's not just one season, Michael insisted. It's the direction of the entire industry. Small houses can't compete with the resources of larger groups. Meridian is offering $7 million, Emma. $7 million. We could all walk away financially secure. Walk away, I repeated, the words tasting bitter. That's exactly what Dad was afraid would happen. Michael glanced at James, clearly expecting support. But my brother remained uncharacteristically silent, watching our exchange with an intensity that suggested he was seeing our relationship in a new light. Your father was stuck in the past, Michael said dismissively. He refused to acknowledge market realities. Something in his tone, the casual disrespect for the man who had welcomed him into our family, who had given him a position in the company despite reservations, ignited a clarity in me that cut through the fog of grief and confusion. When did you start talking to Meridian? I asked suddenly. The exact date. When did those discussions begin? Michael hesitated, thrown by the direct question. I don't recall precisely. A few months ago, perhaps. Before or after Dad changed.
His will?
Another hesitation. Around the same time, I suppose. You suppose? I echoed flatly. Were you already negotiating with Meridian when Dad and I went to Vermont together? Michael's silence was answer enough. Did Dad know about your conversations? With Meridian? I pressed. Michael shifted his weight, discomfort finally breaking through his polished exterior. I mentioned the possibility of strategic partnerships. Yes. Charles was resistant to the idea, but I assumed he'd come around once he understood the financial benefits. So he explicitly rejected the idea of selling to Meridian, I clarified, and then immediately changed his will to ensure the company couldn't be sold for at least 10 years after his death. That's a simplistic interpretation. It's the truth, I interrupted. Dad changed his will because he realized you were trying to position Winters for a sale. He saw what I didn't, that you viewed his life's work as nothing more than an asset to be liquidated. Michael's expression hardened. This self-righteous attitude isn't helpful, Emma. We need to discuss concrete steps for challenging these unreasonable restrictions. There will be no challenge, I stated firmly. The will stands as written. Winters Publishing remains independent, with me as CEO. Michael laughed, a short, dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. You can't be serious. You've never run a company before. You're an editor, not a chief executive. I'm whatever my father believed I could be, I replied evenly. And he believed I could lead Winters Publishing. This is absurd, Michael snapped, his composure finally cracking. James, surely you see how irrational this is? Your father's sentimental decision is going to destroy the company's value. James had been watching our exchange silently, his expression thoughtful. Now he straightened in his chair, meeting Michael's gaze directly. Actually, he said slowly, I think Emma has a point. Dad built something that matters. Selling it to become another casualty of corporate consolidation wouldn't honor that legacy. Michael stared at James incredulously. You can't possibly... He stopped abruptly, recalibrating his approach. You're both emotional right now. That's understandable. But making business decisions based on sentiment is dangerous. Is that how you see our marriage too, Michael? I asked quietly. As a business decision? The question hung in the air, between us, heavy with implication. For a moment, genuine emotion flashed across Michael's face. Surprise, perhaps even hurt. Then his expression smoothed into the careful neutrality I recognized from his professional negotiations. That's not a fair question, Emma. Isn't it? I pressed. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you married the boss's daughter with your eye on the eventual payday. Was that the plan all along? Wait for Dad to die, then cash in on his life's work? You're being hysterical, Michael said coldly. This conversation isn't productive. We should continue when you're thinking more rationally. The condescension in his tone crystallized something in me, a decision that had been forming since I first heard my father's letter. I agree this conversation isn't productive, I said, rising from my chair. In fact, I think you should leave. Michael blinked, genuinely taken aback. Leave? This is ridiculous. We need to discuss our strategy moving forward. There is no our strategy, I stated firmly. There's my father's will, which I intend to honor, and there's your plan to sell his company against his explicit wishes. Those two paths don't intersect. Emma, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I cut him off. I'm asking you to leave my father's house so I can continue grieving him without your presence reminding me of your betrayal. Michael's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. Meridian won't wait forever. This opportunity has a limited window. Then I suggest you call them and explain that Winters Publishing is no longer for sale, I replied. Never was, actually, since you had no authority to offer it. Michael looked to James, seeking an ally, but my brother simply shook his head. I think you should go, Michael. Emma and I have company matters to discuss. For a moment, I thought, Michael might argue further, but something in our united front must have convinced him of the futility. His jaw tightened as he glanced between us. This isn't over, he said finally. Charles's will isn't as airtight as you think. There are always options for those willing to pursue them. Is that a threat? I asked quietly. Michael adjusted, his cuffs regaining his composure. It's a reality check, I'll see myself out. We listened to his footsteps crossing the foyer, the sharp sound of the front door closing behind him. The kitchen felt lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted from the air itself. James exhaled heavily. Well, that was illuminating. Yes, I agreed, sinking back into my chair, though not particularly surprising in retrospect. You think he married you for the company? James asked bluntly. I considered the question, memories of our 5-year relationship filtering. Through this new lens of understanding, not entirely, but I think the potential inheritance was part of the calculation. Michael has always been strategic in his relationships. Dad never trusted him, James remarked. I used to think it was just protective father stuff, but maybe he saw something we didn't. He saw a lot of things we didn't, I agreed softly, including what might happen after he was gone. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened since morning pressing down on us. My confrontation with Michael had left me drained but oddly clear-headed, as though removing a persistent source of interference had finally allowed me to tune into a clearer frequency. What happens now? James asked eventually. It was a simple question with overwhelmingly complex answers. What happened now with Winters Publishing? With my marriage? With our fractured family dynamics? The path ahead seemed simultaneously daunting and blindingly clear. Now, I said, straightening my shoulders. We honor Dad's wishes. We run Winters Publishing according to his vision, preserving what matters while evolving where necessary. You make it sound simple, James commented, but there was no bitterness in his tone. The principle is simple. I clarified. The execution will be anything but. The company needs both of us, James. You know operations better than anyone. Dad, recognize that. It's why he left you a significant ownership stake. James studied me for a long moment. And you really want me involved? After everything? Your family, I said simply. And you understand the value of what Dad built, even if you express it differently than he did. I need your expertise if Winters is going to thrive. For the first time that day, James smiled, a small, cautious gesture, but genuine nonetheless. Dad would be pleased to hear you say that. He always worried we'd drift apart after he was gone. The observation tugged at my heart. Maybe that's another reason for the will structure, to give us a reason to work together rather than go our separate ways. Manipulative old man, James said, but his tone was affectionate. Strategic, I corrected with a sad smile. Like all good publishers, he was playing the long game. The phone on the kitchen wall rang, startling us both. I glanced at the caller ID and felt a wave of relief when I recognized the number of Winters Publishing's main office. It's probably Margaret, I said, referring to Dad's longtime assistant. I should take this. James nodded, standing to give me privacy. I'll be in the study. There are some production reports I should review if we're really doing this. As he left, I felt a cautious optimism unfurling within me. The day had been a roller coaster of betrayal, revelations, and unexpected alliances, but somehow I'd ended up exactly where Dad had positioned me, at the helm of his company, with James at my side in a supporting role. Whether that had been lucky timing or the result of his careful planning, I couldn't say. Perhaps it was both. I picked up the phone, adopting the professional tone I used at the office. Emma Winters speaking. Emma, thank goodness. Margaret's familiar voice came through, tinged with relief. I've been trying to reach you. There's some confusion here at the office. Michael stopped by an hour ago. Told everyone there would be an important announcement tomorrow about the company's future. He was cleaning out your father's desk. Her voice dropped to a concerned whisper. He took the production schedules for next season and the author contract files. My moment of optimism evaporated instantly. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remain calm. Michael has no authority to make company announcements or remove files, Margaret. He's not in charge. That's what I thought, she said, sounding relieved. But he was so confident, and with Mr. Winters gone. She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable questioning what appeared to be a family matter. I understand the confusion, I assured her. But according to my father's will, I'm now the CEO of Winters Publishing. James remains in his role as production director. Nothing else changes for now. Oh, Margaret's surprise was evident. I see. So when Michael said there would be changes, he was speaking without authority, I finished for her. I'll address this with him directly. In the meantime, please let the staff know there will be no major announcements or structural changes right now. Our priority is stability and continuing. My father's legacy. I'll tell everyone, Margaret promised, relief evident in her voice. And Emma, I'm sorry about your father. He was enormously proud of you, you know. Always telling anyone who would listen about your editorial instincts. The simple statement pierced through my professional veneer, bringing fresh tears to my eyes. Thank you, Margaret. That means a lot. After hanging up, I leaned against the counter, trying to process this new development. Michael had moved quickly, attempting to create facts on the ground before I could assert my authority. Taking the production schedules and contracts was a calculated move. With those, he could potentially continue discussions with Meridian, showing them the company's pipeline and financial projections. I found James in Dad's study, already reviewing files on the computer. He looked up as I entered, immediately registering my expression. What's happened? Michael went to the office, I explained, sinking into the leather chair opposite the desk. Told the staff there would be an announcement tomorrow. Took production schedules and author contracts. He's still moving forward with Meridian. James closed the laptop with a decisive click. We need to get to the office. Now. It's almost 5, I pointed out. Most of the staff will be heading home. Exactly, James said, already standing. Which means Michael might use the opportunity to continue gathering information or making unauthorized contacts. We need to secure the premises and the files. His decisiveness surprised me, but I recognized the logic immediately. You're right. Let me grab my purse. 20 minutes later, we pulled into the parking lot of the converted textile mill that housed Winter's Publishing. The red brick building with its floor-to-ceiling windows had always filled me with pride, a physical manifestation of my father's vision and hard work. Now it felt like contested territory, a battleground in a conflict I never anticipated fighting. Michael's sleek Audi was nowhere to be seen, but I recognized the cars of a few staff members who typically worked late. James used his key to unlock the main entrance, and we rode the elevator to the 3rd floor in tense silence. The office was quieter than usual, but not deserted. A few editors were still at their desks, and I could hear the production team's printer running in the back. Margaret looked up in surprise as we entered the reception area. Emma, James, I didn't expect you back so soon after. She trailed off, clearly unsure how to reference our father's death in a professional context. It's okay, Margaret, I assured her. We needed to address some urgent matters. Is Michael still here? She shook her head. He left about 30 minutes ago. Seemed in quite a hurry. James and I exchanged a look. Did he take anything else with him? James asked. Besides the files Emma mentioned? Margaret frowned slightly. He had his briefcase, which looked quite full, and he spent some time in the server room with Terry from IT. Alarm bells rang. In my head, the server room contained our digital archives, including all our contracts, financial records, and internal communications. Where's Terry now? I asked urgently. Gone for the day, I think, Margaret replied, looking increasingly concerned. Is something wrong? Possibly, I admitted. Margaret, could you call an emergency staff meeting for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? Everyone needs to attend, including remote workers if possible. Of course, she nodded, already reaching for her notepad. Should I include any specific information in the notice? I considered for a moment. Just say that following Charles Winter's passing, there will be an important update regarding company leadership and future directions. Emphasize that it's mandatory. As Margaret began drafting the email, James touched my elbow. We should check Dad's office and the server room. I nodded, and we made our way down the hallway to the corner office my father had occupied for over 30 years. The door was ajar, and even from the threshold, I could see evidence of Michael's intrusion. The desk drawers stood open. The usually neat surface was scattered with papers, and the built-in filing cabinet was in disarray. He was looking for something specific, James observed, surveying the chaos. I moved to the desk, trying to determine what might be missing beyond the production schedules and contracts Margaret had mentioned. The company checkbook was still in its drawer, but the folder containing bank account information was gone. So was the binder of board meeting minutes from the past year. He's gathering ammunition, I said grimly. Financial records, meeting, minutes, anything that might help him challenge the will or make a case to Meridian. James was examining the filing cabinet, his expression darkening. The author correspondence files are missing too. Those contain all of Dad's personal notes about negotiations, future project discussions. Valuable intelligence for an acquiring company, I finished, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. Let's check the server room. The server room was small but essential, housing the digital infrastructure that supported our entire operation. Everything from manuscript submissions to financial records was backed up here. As soon as we entered, I knew something was wrong. The main server's access panel was open, and a portable hard drive sat on the table beside it. James swore under his breath. He's been copying files. I picked up the hard drive. It was warm to the touch, suggesting recent use. We need to call Terry. Find out exactly what Michael asked him to do. James was already scanning the server logs on the adjacent monitor. According to this, there was a complete backup initiated at 3:42 p.m. It finished at... He checked. The final entry, 4:38 p.m., right before Margaret said Michael left. A complete backup would include everything, I said, feeling slightly sick. All our contracts, financial data, author information, upcoming projects, marketing plans. Everything Meridian would need to evaluate the company and plan how to dismantle it, James confirmed grimly. Michael's not just challenging the will. He's actively trying to facilitate a sale despite the prohibitions. The realization of what we were facing hit me with full force. This wasn't simply a family disagreement about inheritance. It was a coordinated attempt to undermine my father's explicit wishes and seize control of his company. Michael wasn't going to back down easily, and he clearly had no qualms about using underhanded tactics. We need to lock this down, I said firmly. All of it. Change server access passwords, secure the remaining files, contact our authors to warn them about potential unauthorized communications. James nodded, already reaching for the phone to call Terry. We should also contact Harrison, he added. He needs to know what Michael's doing. As James made the call, I sank into the chair by the monitoring station, the enormity of the situation washing over me. Just this morning, I had been a grieving daughter trying to attend my father's will, reading. Now I was the CEO of a publishing company under siege, facing a battle with my own husband over my father's legacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad had structured his will to protect Winter's Publishing from exactly this scenario, a forced sale, against his wishes. He'd foreseen the threat, but perhaps not its source or intensity. Or maybe he had, and that's why he'd given me controlling interest and created the safeguard fund to buy out dissenters. Either way, his protection now rested on my shoulders. The responsibility was daunting, but as I sat in that small server room, surrounded by the digital heart of my father's company, I felt a surge of resolve replacing my initial shock. Michael had underestimated me. He'd assumed my grief would make me pliable, that I would eventually yield to his business expertise and accept the sale as inevitable. He'd calculated wrong. James hung up the phone, interrupting my thoughts. Terry's on his way in. Says Michael told him it was a routine backup authorized by the board as part of the succession planning. His expression was grim. He's been systematically lying to everyone. Not anymore, I said, standing up with newfound determination. Starting tomorrow, the truth comes out. And Michael? James asked cautiously. I thought about my 5-year marriage, about the dreams we'd shared and the promises we'd made. Then I thought about Michael's calculated deception, his dismissal of my father's wishes, his willingness to destroy a company that meant everything to our family. The man I'd married and the man who'd taken those files couldn't coexist in my understanding anymore. Michael has made his choice, I said quietly. Now I'm making mine. As we left the server room to await Terry's arrival, I felt strangely calm despite the chaos unfolding around me. For the first time since receiving that devastating call in Chicago, I had a clear purpose. Not just to grieve my father, but to protect what he'd built. To honor not just his memory, but his vision. Tomorrow would bring challenges I couldn't yet imagine. Legal battles, staffing concerns, difficult conversations with authors and partners. The road ahead would be harder than anything I'd faced before. But in this moment, standing in the hallways of Winter's Publishing with my brother at my side, I felt my father's presence more strongly than at any point since his death. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a foundation beneath my feet, solid and unwavering. Dad had trusted me with his legacy. Now it was time to prove that trust was well placed. I spent that night in my father's study, surrounded by the literary world he had cultivated for decades. Books lined every wall, first editions from authors he'd discovered, international translations of Winter's publishing titles, and well-worn classics that had inspired his editorial vision. The grandfather clock in the corner, a family heirloom, that had witnessed 3 generations of Winter's decisions, ticked steadily as I pored over company documents spread across his mahogany desk. Sleep wasn't an option, not with Michael's betrayal still fresh, not with the weight of my father's legacy now resting squarely on my shoulders. I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting for, and against. The quarterly financial reports told part of the story, modest but consistent profits, a backlist that continued to perform well, and a handful of recent titles that had exceeded expectations. But they also revealed concerning trends: rising production costs, increasing advances needed to secure notable authors, and the steady encroachment of digital platforms changing reader habits. Around 3 a.m, I discovered a hidden folder in my father's personal laptop, protected by a password I guessed on the 3rd try. My mother's birthday followed by mine. Inside were dozens of documents detailing his long-term vision for Winter's publishing, including extensive notes on potential innovations, emerging markets, and adaptations to industry changes. One document, dated just a month before his death, outlined what he called the preservation plan. The greatest threat to independent publishing, he had written, is not technological disruption or market consolidation, but the loss of purpose that accompanies prioritizing profit over passion. Winter's must evolve without surrendering its soul. The words struck me like a physical blow, not just for their insight, but because they so perfectly captured what Michael had failed to understand. My husband had seen only the financial potential of my father's company, viewing its literary legacy as marketable branding rather than its essential character. By dawn, fueled by coffee and determination, I had formulated a strategy, not just for confronting Michael and protecting the company from immediate threats, but for carrying my father's vision forward in a way that honored both tradition and innovation. I would need allies, starting with James, whose operational expertise was essential despite our complicated relationship. I was just closing the laptop when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Harrison's office, surprising at this early hour. "Emma? Walter Harrison here. I apologize for calling so early, but there's been a development you need to know about immediately." The gravity in his voice sent a chill through me. "What's happened?" "Michael filed an emergency petition with the probate court late yesterday afternoon, challenging your father's will on grounds of undue influence and questionable mental capacity. He's requesting a temporary injunction preventing you from acting as CEO until the matter is resolved." My exhaustion evaporated, replaced by cold fury. On what possible grounds? Dad was perfectly lucid until the day he died. "The petition claims your Vermont trip created an opportunity for you to manipulate your father when he was experiencing cognitive decline. Their words, not mine. They're suggesting you exploited his alleged condition to secure control of the company." "That's absurd," I snapped. Dad was sharp as ever. His doctor can confirm there was no cognitive decline whatsoever. "I agree the claims are baseless," Harrison assured me. "But they don't need to win to cause problems. Even temporary legal limbo could create enough uncertainty to devalue the company and make a sale to Meridian look like the most stable option for authors and staff." The strategy was as transparent as it was ruthless. This is about creating leverage, not pursuing justice. "Precisely," Harrison confirmed. "The hearing is scheduled for Friday morning. That gives us 2 days to prepare." Our response: "Can Michael even do this?" I asked. "He's not a blood relative or a longtime employee. What standing does he have to challenge the will? As your spouse, he can claim he's protecting marital assets and your best interests. Harrison explained. It's thin legal ground, but enough to get a hearing. More concerning is that James is listed as a co-petitioner. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. James? That's impossible. I just spoke with him yesterday. He seemed to be coming around to working together. Harrison hesitated. According to the filing, James believes your father was manipulated during a vulnerable period. It states he observed concerning memory lapses and confusion in the months before Charles's death. I sank into my father's leather chair, mind racing. Had James been playing me all along? Our conversation yesterday had seemed genuine. His reluctant acceptance of Dad's decisions, his willingness to consider partnership rather than resistance. Had it all been a strategy to keep me distracted while he and Michael moved against me? Legally? Emma, are you there? Harrison's voice drew me back. Yes, sorry. This is unexpected. I struggled to maintain composure. What do we do now? We fight, Harrison stated simply. I'll prepare our formal response immediately. In the meantime, you should secure any evidence of your father's mental clarity, recent correspondence, business decisions, witness accounts from staff who interacted with him regularly. And what about James? I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. Harrison sighed. Family dynamics and inheritance disputes are always complicated. But remember, actions speak louder than words. Focus on the facts and protecting your father's wishes. We'll sort out motivations later. After hanging up, I sat motionless, watching dawn light gradually illuminate the study. The betrayal felt complete now. Husband and brother united against me, using legal maneuvers to undermine our father's explicit intentions. The pain was almost physical, a hollowness that expanded with each breath. Then my gaze fell on the portrait above the fireplace, my father at his desk, surrounded by manuscripts, his expression intent and purposeful. He had built Winters Publishing from nothing, navigating decades of industry changes, economic downturns, and personal challenges without ever compromising his vision. Now that legacy rested with me. I picked up my phone and dialed James's number, determined to confront him. Directly, he answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. Emma, it's not even 7. Is something wrong? You tell me, I replied coldly. Harrison just called about the petition you and Michael filed. Cognitive decline? Memory lapses? Were you planning to mention any of this yesterday, or was pretending to support me part of your strategy? Silence stretched for several seconds. Then, what petition? What are you talking about? Don't, I cut him off. The court filing. Challenging Dad's will. You're listed as a co-petitioner with Michael. The hearing is Friday. More silence, then rustling sounds suggesting he was sitting up. Emma, I swear I don't know anything about this. I haven't filed anything with any court. Harrison has the documents, James. Your name is on them. Then someone's using my name without permission, he said, his voice hardening. I told you yesterday where I stand. I may not like Dad's decisions, but I'm not fighting them. And I'm certainly not claiming he had cognitive problems. That's completely false. His indignation sounded genuine, but after so many deceptions, I was hesitant to trust my judgment. If that's true, then Michael is manipulating both of us. It wouldn't be the first time, James muttered. Where are you now? At Dad's house. I've been here all night reviewing company documents. Stay there, he instructed. I'm coming over. We need to figure this out together. By the time James arrived 40 minutes later, I had pulled together a folder of recent evidence of our father's mental acuity, emails to authors showing his characteristic insight, detailed notes on manuscripts he'd reviewed, and financial decisions that demonstrated clear strategic thinking. James looked as haggard as I felt, his normally impeccable appearance rumpled from hastily dressing. He examined the court filing I'd received from Harrison with increasing anger. This is forgery, he stated flatly, pointing to the signature on the document. That's not how I write my name. And these claims about Dad's mental state? I never observed anything remotely like this. Dad was sharp until the end. Relief washed over me, followed by a renewed sense of betrayal toward Michael. Why would he do this? Use your name without permission? Because the petition looks stronger coming from both of us, James reasoned. A united front from Charles Winter's children carries more weight than just his son-in-law. Plus, I've worked with Dad daily for 15 years. My observations about his mental state would seem more credible. Can we prove he forged your signature? James nodded grimly. Easily. I'll sign an affidavit immediately and testify if necessary. But Emma, this means Michael is playing hardball. If he's willing to commit forgery, he's desperate. The implications were chilling. Harrison thinks this is about creating leverage for the Meridian sale, not actually winning in court. That makes sense, James agreed. Even temporary uncertainty could spook authors and key staff. If several major writers jump ship, the company's value drops significantly. We need to get ahead of this, I said, thinking aloud. Contact our top authors before they hear rumors, reassure the staff, present a united front. James was already pulling out his phone. I'll call Harrison, tell him I'm not part of this petition and never authorize the use of my name. That should derail Michael's strategy significantly. And I'll start reaching out to our key authors, I decided. Beginning with Elaine Townsend. If she stays publicly supportive, others will likely follow her lead. For the next several hours, James and I worked side by side in my father's study, our previous tensions temporarily set aside in the face of a common threat. I spoke with 6 of our most prominent authors, emphasizing continuity and our commitment to their work. James drafted a formal statement with Harrison, explicitly denying any involvement in challenging the will and affirming his acceptance of our father's succession plan. By noon, we had established the beginnings of a counteroffensive, but the emotional toll was mounting. I found myself staring blankly at my father's bookshelves, exhaustion and hurt competing for dominance. You should rest, James said, noticing my fading concentration. You mentioned you were up all night. Take a few hours. I'll keep working on this. The suggestion of leaving him in charge of our defense, even temporarily, triggered an instinctive wariness that I immediately felt guilty for. I'm fine. You're not, he countered firmly. And we need you sharp. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Harrison is filing my affidavit this afternoon. There's nothing else urgent until we hear his response. Recognizing the wisdom in his words, I reluctantly agreed to a short rest. As I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, preserved largely as it had been when I left for college, a wave of nostalgia hit me. Memories of simpler times when my father would bring home advance copies of new releases for me to read, sitting on the edge of my bed as we discussed character development and narrative techniques, while my high school friends were gossiping about dances and dating. I had just stretched out on the familiar bed when my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. We need to talk. This doesn't have to be adversarial. Meet me at Riverside Park at 3 p.m. I stared at the message, torn between fury at his audacity and curiosity about what possible justification he could offer for his actions. After a moment's hesitation, I responded, After you forged my brother's signature on a court document and falsely claimed my father had cognitive decline? I think we're well past adversarial. His reply came quickly. There's more happening than you understand. Things your father kept from both of you. Meet me and I'll explain everything. Come alone. This needs to stay between us for now. The cryptic response intensified my curiosity, despite my better judgment. What could my father possibly have hidden that would justify Michael's actions? The rational part of my brain recognized this could be another manipulation tactic, but the emotional part, the part still struggling to reconcile the husband I thought I knew with the man who had betrayed my family's trust, wanted answers. After brief deliberation, I texted back, "Fine. 3 p.m. by the boathouse. But I'm recording our conversation. Whatever game Michael was playing, I wouldn't walk into it naively." I set an alarm for 2:30, then closed my eyes, hoping for at least a brief respite from the storm engulfing my life. Sleep came almost instantly, but brought no peace. My dreams were fragmented scenes of my father trying to tell me something important, while Michael and James pulled me in opposite directions, their voices overlapping until I couldn't distinguish who was saying what. I woke with a start when my alarm sounded, feeling more disoriented than rested. Downstairs, I found James on the phone with what sounded like one of our distributors, his tone reassuring as he explained that rumors of a company sale were unfounded. He covered the mouthpiece when he saw me. "Feel better?" "Not really," I admitted. "Listen, I need to step out for a bit. Michael wants to meet at Riverside Park. Says there's something important I need to know." James's expression darkened. "That's a bad idea. He's trying to manipulate you outside the presence of lawyers." "I know what he's doing," I assured him. "But I need to understand why. Why go to these lengths? Why forge your signature? Why claim Dad had mental problems when it's so easily disproven?" "Because he wants the Meridian money," James said flatly. $7 million is a powerful motivator." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But what if there's more to it? Dad clearly anticipated something like this happening. What if Michael knows something we don't?" James looked skeptical but didn't argue further. "At least let me drive you. I'll stay out of sight, but I don't. Like the idea of you meeting him alone after what he's done?" "I'll be fine," I insisted. "It's a public park in broad daylight. Besides, he's manipulative, not dangerous." "Just be careful," James relented, "and record everything." Riverside Park was busy with afternoon joggers and dog walkers when I arrived. The crisp autumn air carried hints of approaching winter, and golden leaves skittered across the path as I made my way to the boathouse. Michael was already waiting, standing at the railing overlooking the water, his posture unnaturally stiff, in his tailored overcoat. He turned as I approached, his expression a practiced mask of concern that I once would have found convincing. "Emma, thank you for coming." "Let's skip the pleasantries," I said, keeping several feet between us. "Explain why you forged my brother's signature and falsely claimed my father had cognitive problems." Michael glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. "I didn't forge anything. James agreed to the petition yesterday morning, then apparently had a change of heart. As for your father's mental state, there's documentation you haven't seen." "What documentation?" I challenged. "Dad saw his doctor for a routine checkup 3 weeks before he died. Clean bill of health, including cognitive function." "Your father had a private neurological consultation in Boston 6 months ago," Michael countered. "He didn't tell anyone. Not you, not James, not his regular physician. He was experiencing memory lapses and mood changes that concerned him." The claim landed like a blow. "That's not possible. I spoke with him almost daily. I would have noticed." "He was careful to hide it," Michael insisted. "Particularly from you. He didn't want to worry you or undermine confidence in his leadership. And you expect me to believe he confided in you instead?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. "Not initially," Michael admitted. "I found the medical reports by accident while helping him organize his home office during your Chicago trip. When I confronted him, he swore me to secrecy. I studied my husband's face, searching for signs of deception. His story seemed implausible, yet delivered with absolute conviction. Even if that were true, which I don't believe for a second, it doesn't justify trying to overturn his will." "The will is a symptom of his condition," Michael argued. "The dramatic change in succession plans, the arbitrary sale prohibition, the uneven distribution of shares. These aren't rational business decisions, Emma. They're the actions of someone whose judgment was compromised. They're the actions of someone who saw through you I countered. Dad realized you were positioning the company for sale and took steps to prevent it. The timing wasn't coincidental. It was responsive. Michael shook his head, his expression softening into something resembling sympathy. I know how much you idolized your father. That's why this is so difficult. But Charles wasn't infallible, and toward the end, his decision-making became increasingly erratic. Where is this alleged medical documentation? I demanded. My lawyer has it, Michael replied smoothly. We can provide copies during discovery. But Emma, this doesn't have to become a protracted legal battle. There's a simpler solution. Let me guess. Sell to Meridian? Consider it objectively, he urged. The publishing landscape is changing rapidly. Print sales declining, digital, disruption accelerating, consolidation increasing. Meridian offers resources and scale that Winters can't achieve independently. Meridian offers nothing but destruction, I retorted. They've gutted every independent publisher they've acquired. Staff cuts, backlist abandonment, homogenized editorial direction, they're everything Dad stood against. That's an oversimplification, Michael insisted. Their resources could amplify what makes Winters special. Wider distribution, better marketing support, international expansion, all while maintaining your editorial vision. My editorial vision doesn't include selling my father's legacy to corporate raiders, I stated firmly. And this conversation is pointless. Without James as a co-petitioner, your challenge to the will loses credibility. And when the court sees you forged his signature, your entire case collapses. Something flashed in Michael's eyes. Frustration, perhaps, or calculation. James is making a mistake siding with you. Your father's plan isn't sustainable. The company's financial position is more precarious than you realize. I've reviewed the financials extensively, I countered. Yes, there are challenges, but nothing that justifies a panic sale. You haven't seen everything, Michael said cryptically. There are obligations coming due that aren't in the standard reports. The statement gave me pause. What obligations? The Westfield building mortgage has a balloon payment due in 6 months, he explained. $3.5 million. Charles was planning to refinance, but with his death and the leadership transition, the bank is hesitant. They've indicated they'll require full payment. The revelation was genuinely surprising. The Westfield building had been Winters Publishing's headquarters for nearly 20 years, a converted textile mill that my father had renovated with obvious pride. I knew there was a mortgage, but not the specific terms. The company has reserves, I said, less confidently than I intended. Not enough for this payment while maintaining operating capital, Michael countered. Charles knew this was coming. It's why he was considering strategic partnerships before his cognitive issues became apparent. I felt momentarily destabilized. The balloon payment wasn't mentioned in any of the documents I'd reviewed overnight. If true, it represented a significant financial challenge that could indeed threaten the company's independence. Michael sensed my uncertainty. This doesn't have to be adversarial, Emma. We both want what's best for Winters Publishing. My approach is practical, not malicious. Forging my brother's signature was malicious, I reminded him. Making false. Claims about my father's mental health was malicious. I made a mistake with the filing, he conceded. I genuinely believed James supported the petition based on our conversations. As for your father's health, I'm only reporting what I observed and what the medical documentation confirms. I stepped back, needing physical distance to clear my thinking. I need to verify this mortgage situation independently. Of course, Michael nodded reasonably. Check with First Atlantic Bank. Your father's contact there was Thomas Ridgway in commercial lending. But Emma, time is working against us. Meridian's offer has a 10-day expiration clause. If we don't move forward, they'll pursue other acquisition targets. Let them, I said automatically, though my mind was racing with this new information. Winters isn't for sale. At least consider meeting with their representatives, Michael pressed. Hear their proposal firsthand before dismissing it. You owe your father's legacy that much diligence. The appeal to my sense of responsibility was skillfully delivered, but something about the entire conversation felt orchestrated. The gradual revelation of new problems, the convenient solutions, the superficial concessions masking an unchanged agenda. Michael was deploying the same negotiation tactics I'd seen him use in business contexts, now directed at me. I'll verify the mortgage situation, I said finally. Nothing more until I have all the facts. That's all I'm asking, Michael smiled, relief evident in his expression. Informed decisions, not emotional reactions. Should we discuss this further over dinner tonight? At home? The casual reference to our shared domestic life after everything that had transpired struck me as profoundly tone-deaf. No, Michael. I'm staying at my father's house indefinitely, and until the petition against the will is withdrawn, any further communication should go through our lawyers. His smile faltered. Emma, don't let legal maneuvering create a personal rift. We've built a life together. 5 years of marriage shouldn't be discarded over a business disagreement. This isn't just a business disagreement, I responded, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. You conspired against my father's wishes, lied about his mental health, forged my brother's signature, and attempted to manipulate me out of my inheritance. Those aren't actions I can simply overlook. I'm trying to protect your future, he insisted, reaching for my hand, which I quickly withdrew. The publishing industry is changing, Emma. Sentimentality is a luxury we can't afford if we want financial security. His words echoed our earlier conversation but hit differently now, illuminating the fundamental disconnect in our values. What Michael dismissed as sentimentality, my father's vision, literary legacy, commitment to authors, represented everything meaningful about Winters Publishing. The divide between us wasn't just about business strategy, it was about core principles. I need to go, I said, suddenly weary of the conversation. I'll have my lawyer contact yours regarding the petition. Emma, please, Michael began, but I was already walking away, his voice fading behind me as I followed the leaf-strewn path back toward the park entrance. My mind churned with questions as I drove back to my father's house. Was the balloon payment real? Had Dad actually consulted a neurologist in Boston? If so, why hadn't he mentioned it to me or James? None of it aligned with the father I knew, meticulous in business planning, transparent with family about important matters. James was waiting in the kitchen when I returned, a fresh pot of coffee brewing. How did it go? He asked, studying my expression with concern. Confusing, I admitted, sinking into a chair at the table. He claims there's a $3.5 million balloon payment due on the Westfield building mortgage in 6 months, and that Dad had neurological consultations in Boston that showed cognitive decline. James frowned. That's nonsense. I manage all the property matters for the company. The Westfield mortgage was refinanced last year. There's no balloon payment. Coming due. You're sure? I asked, relief washing over me. Positive. I handled the paperwork myself. It's a standard 15-year fixed commercial mortgage. Nothing exotic, no balloon payments. And the neurological consultations? James shook his head firmly. Dad never mentioned any cognitive concerns, and he wasn't secretive about medical issues. After Mom died, he was almost obsessively transparent about his health. Annual physicals, routine screenings, everything documented and shared with both of us. He wouldn't have hidden something that significant. The confirmation of my suspicions simultaneously relieved and infuriated me. So Michael is fabricating evidence to support his petition. It appears so, James agreed grimly, and badly, given how easily disproven both claims are. But why? I wondered aloud. He has to know we'd verify these claims. What's the strategy in lies that will inevitably be exposed? James considered this, pouring us both coffee before responding. Maybe he's desperate. The Meridian deal falling through would cost him millions personally. Or maybe it's about buying time, creating confusion and uncertainty while he pursues other angles. Other angles like what? I'm not sure, James admitted. But Harrison called while you were out. The judge assigned to the case is Franklin Mercer. I recognized the name immediately. Dad's old golf partner? James nodded. They've known each other for decades. Mercer is unlikely to be sympathetic to claims about Dad's mental decline given their regular interactions right up until the end. So Michael's petition is even more doomed than we thought, I concluded. Probably, James agreed, which makes his persistence puzzling unless… Unless what? I prompted when he trailed off. James hesitated. Unless he has another motivator beyond the Meridian money, something we're missing. The suggestion lingered in the air between us, adding yet another layer of uncertainty to an already complex situation. What else could Michael be pursuing? What might he know that we didn't? Before I could explore this further, my phone rang. An unfamiliar Boston number. I answered cautiously. Emma Winters? A professional female voice inquired. Yes, that's me. This is Dr. Abigail Levin from Massachusetts General Hospital. I understand you're Charles Winters' daughter. My pulse quickened. Yes, I am. My father passed away recently. I'm aware, and I'm very sorry for your loss, she replied. I'm calling because I received a concerning request from a Michael Grant, who identified himself as your husband. He's seeking copies of your father's neurological consultation records from approximately 6 months ago. I exchanged a startled glance with James. Did my father have neurological consultations with you, Dr. Levin? No, she answered firmly. That's precisely why I'm calling. I've never treated Charles Winters, nor do our records show him as a patient in our neurology department. Mr. Grant was quite insistent that records existed and suggested I search under possible aliases or private payment arrangements. A cold anger settled in my chest. I see. And did you tell my husband these records don't exist? I explained that patient confidentiality would prevent me from confirming or denying treatment without proper authorization, Dr. Levin clarified. However, given the unusual nature of his inquiry and suggestions that I search for records under aliases, I felt obligated to contact you directly. Thank you for doing so, I said sincerely. My father had no neurological issues. My husband is currently involved in a legal proceeding challenging my father's will, and it seems he's attempting to fabricate evidence. That's extremely concerning, Dr. Levin replied. If you need documentation confirming your father was never treated in our department, I'd be happy to provide an official statement to that effect. That would be incredibly helpful, I confirmed, feeling a surge of gratitude toward this conscientious physician. If you could email that to me today, it would be greatly appreciated. After providing my email address and thanking her again, I hung up and relayed the conversation to James, whose expression darkened with each detail. He's actively trying to fabricate medical evidence, James concluded, disbelief evident in his voice. That goes beyond aggressive legal tactics into potentially criminal behavior. He's desperate, I realized. The petition was probably filed, expecting you wouldn't challenge your inclusion, and I'd be too emotional to mount an effective response. Now that strategy's collapsing and he's scrambling. James nodded slowly. We should inform Harrison immediately and consider filing a complaint with the Bar Association regarding Michael's attorney, who must be complicit in this. As James reached for his phone, mine buzzed with a text notification. It was from Margaret at the office. Emma, please call ASAP. Thomas Ridgway from First Atlantic Bank is here asking for you. Says it's urgent regarding the Westfield building. I showed James the message, a sense of foreboding growing stronger. Didn't you just say there was no balloon payment issue with the mortgage? There isn't, he confirmed, looking increasingly concerned. At least there wasn't when I last reviewed the documentation. But if the bank's representative is showing up unannounced... I dialed Margaret's number immediately, putting the call on speaker so James could hear. "Emma, thank goodness," Margaret answered promptly. "Mr. Ridgway is quite insistent about speaking with you. He seems rather agitated." "Put him on, please," I requested, exchanging a worried glance with James. A moment later, a male voice came through. "Ms. Winters, Thomas Ridgway from First Atlantic's Commercial Division." "Yes, Mr. Ridgway. I understand you're at our office regarding the Westfield building?" "Indeed," he confirmed, his tone professionally serious. "I've been trying to reach someone from Winters Publishing since yesterday regarding the mortgage acceleration notice." "Mortgage acceleration?" I repeated, confused. "What notice?" There was a brief pause. "We sent formal notification to Winters Publishing last week, following receipt of information suggesting material changes in company leadership and financial stability that could impact loan covenants. The notice requires full payment of the outstanding balance within 90 days. James mouthed impossible silently as I struggled to maintain composure. "Mr. Ridgway, this is the first I'm hearing of any acceleration notice. Who provided this information about leadership changes?" We received a detailed financial disclosure from Michael Grant, identified as Winters Publishing's chief financial officer, indicating that Charles Winters' death would trigger significant leadership instability, potentially affecting the company's ability to meet obligations. The pieces suddenly clicked into place, not just Michael's meeting request and fabricated medical evidence, but his entire strategy. He wasn't just pursuing the Meridian sale for the immediate profit. He was actively manufacturing a financial crisis that would force the company into a distressed sale position. "Mr. Ridgway," I said carefully, "Michael Grant is not, and has, never been our chief financial officer. He has no authority to make financial disclosures on behalf of Winters Publishing. Furthermore, while my father has indeed passed away, the succession plan is clearly established in his will, with me assuming the role of CEO and James Winters continuing as production director. There is no leadership instability." Silence followed. This revelation then, I see, this is concerning. The disclosures we received appeared to be on company letterhead with supporting documentation. "That documentation was fabricated," I stated firmly, "as was Mr. Grant's position and authority. We'll be providing you with the official succession documentation and updated corporate structure immediately to clarify any confusion." "That would be advisable," Ridgway responded, his tone now more guarded. "In the meantime, I'll need to consult with our legal department regarding the acceleration notice, given these circumstances." "Of course," I agreed. "James Winters is with me now and can address any immediate questions about the mortgage and company finances." After James provided reassurances about Winters Publishing's financial stability and promised to deliver updated documentation that afternoon, we ended the call, both stunned by this latest revelation. "He fabricated company financial disclosures," James summarized incredulously, "on letterhead, claiming to be our CFO. Creating a banking crisis that would force a distressed sale," I added, the full scope of Michael's scheme becoming clearer. "If the mortgage was accelerated and we couldn't repay it immediately, we'd lose our headquarters and face a severe cash flow crisis," James finished, making Meridian's offer look like a rescue rather than a takeover. The calculated nature of the plan was breathtaking in its audacity and disturbing in its implications. Michael hadn't just been opportunistically pursuing a profitable sale, he had methodically constructed a trap designed to leave us with no viable alternatives. He had lied to me, to James, to our staff, to our banking partners, and was attempting to lie to the court, all to force the outcome he desired regardless of my father's explicit wishes. This isn't just unethical, I said slowly. It's potentially criminal. Bank fraud, forgery, perjury. James ran a hand through his hair, his expression grim. We need to document everything. The forged signature on the petition, the attempted fabrication of medical records, the false financial disclosures to the bank. All of it. And then what? I asked, the enormity of the situation momentarily overwhelming. Criminal charges? Against my own husband? That depends on how far you're willing to go, James replied carefully. But at minimum, we need this. Documentation to definitively end his attempts to challenge the will and interfere with the company. I nodded slowly, resignation settling over me like a heavy cloak. Whatever feelings I still harbored for Michael, complicated by 5 years of shared life and lingering questions about when the deception had begun, had to be set aside. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about my father's legacy, the company's survival, and the livelihoods of everyone who depended on Winter's publishing. Contact Harrison, I decided. Tell him everything. Have him prepare whatever legal documents are necessary to protect the company and enforce the will. And I hesitated, the finality of my next words hanging in the air between us. Have him begin divorce proceedings. The sooner this connection is severed, the better. James nodded, reaching across the table to briefly squeeze my hand, a gesture of support so unexpected from my traditionally distant brother that it nearly brought tears to my eyes. You're doing the right thing, he said simply. Dad would be proud. The words, genuine and unembellished, provided an unexpected comfort. Throughout this ordeal, I had been guided by what I believed my father would want: protection of his company, preservation of his publishing vision, resistance to commercial compromise. Now, facing the painful reality of ending my marriage amid revelations of profound betrayal, hearing that validation from James meant more than I could express. Thank you, I managed, swallowing past the tightness in my throat. For standing with me in this, for refusing to join Michael's petition, for everything. James looked momentarily uncomfortable with the emotional acknowledgement, but nodded. We're family. Despite our differences, that still means something. 3 months later, I stood in my father's office, my office now, gazing out at the autumn leaves swirling around the Westfield building courtyard. Michael's petition had been dismissed with prejudice after Judge Mercer reviewed the evidence of his deceptions. The divorce proceedings continued, but without the bitter contestation I'd feared. Michael had ultimately recognized the futility of his position when faced with the overwhelming evidence against him. Winter's publishing wasn't just surviving, it was thriving under our new direction. James and I had discovered our complementary strengths created a surprisingly effective leadership dynamic. Our first joint acquisition, a debut novel from an unknown writer my father had expressed interest in shortly before his death, had just received a starred review in Publishers Weekly. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. James entered, holding a package. "This just arrived," he said, placing it on my desk. "From Dad's attorney." Inside was a leather-bound journal filled with my father's handwriting. The inscription on the first page read, "For Emma and James, to be opened when you're working together as I always hoped you would. Your journey is just beginning. With love and absolute confidence in you both, Dad." Up next, you've got 2 more stand out. Stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.